We're first going to look at making a frequency distribution from qualitative data. So this will be data that would be non-numeric, so typically a word description. So after we make our frequency distribution for our qualitative data, then we are going to make a bar graph. Right, so specifically right now we're looking at organizing qualitative data. So in our example, the data represents the color of M&Ms in a bag of plain M&Ms. Construct a frequency distribution. Okay, so I typically would refer to this as the raw data. Okay, so this is your actual data set that we want to kind of organize and help kind of summarize what's going on here. So when we go to make a frequency distribution, we will have a column for the color. And then I'm going to have a column that I'm going to call tally. This is an optional column. Okay, you don't have to have that in a frequency distribution, but I'm going to show you if you wanted to use it, how we use it. And then I'm going to have a column for the frequency. Alright, so what sorts of colors am I seeing in my data set? So I see brown, so I'll record it. Yellow, red, see orange, blue, green, and hopefully that's it because I'm running out of room. Yeah, that accounts for all the different colors. Alright, so ultimately I have to get the frequencies. Now, our data sets aren't going to be so big that you couldn't necessarily go through and then just count how many browns that you have. Otherwise, I like to use the tally column and go through here, and then I will then put a tick mark every time I encounter a color. So for instance, I've got brown right here, so I'm going to put a tally mark. Brown right here, I'm going to put another tally mark. And then as soon as you get to 5 tally marks, you do the slash. And I really like slashing, so I'm not going to deny myself the joy of sitting here and putting in all these tallies and putting on all these slashes. So I like to tally it up as I go. Otherwise, if you wanted to go through and just run through and count how many browns there are, put their frequency, you can, because ultimately at the end of the day I just need the numbers over here in this column. Okay, so I'm going to go through my data set and I'm going to put down all these tallies. So I've got brown, brown, so I've got those 2 tick marks. So I've got yellow, red, red, red. So yellow, red, red, red. Brown, orange, blue, green. Brown, orange, blue, green. Alright, so let's see here. So I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to finish putting down the rest of these tick marks. Alright, so let's see here. I've gotten 12 brown so far. Looks like 10 yellow, 9 red, 6 orange, 3 blue, and 5 green. Now, a good thing to do before moving forward is to maybe just double check real quick that we got all the data values over here. So we would run through this. Now they didn't in the question prompt tell me how many data values there are, so I would just have to count these up. So if you were to count these up, you're going to find that there are 45 data points in your raw data. So then add these frequency numbers up, and if you add these frequency numbers up, you will find that you have 45 accounted for over here. So it's just a good way to maybe double check that you didn't leave anybody out. It is not necessarily meaning that these numbers are all correct, because maybe you goofed up twice and it kind of balanced itself out, but it's just a good thing to double check before you move forward at all. So I have 45 data points over here. So now I can go forward and I can go make my bar graph. So a bar graph is a graph constructed by labeling each category of data on either the horizontal or vertical axis and the frequency of the category on the other axis. Rectangles of equal width are drawn for each category. The height of each rectangle represents the category's frequency. So we're going to use this M&M data to construct a frequency bar graph. Okay, so let's come down here to this grid that I have provided. Right, so I'm going to draw in my horizontal and vertical axis. So my horizontal axis I'll have down here. Vertical axis. I should have a title, so maybe we'll call this M&M colors. I plan on putting the various colors down here on this axis, so I will label it. And then over here on this axis, I'm going to put those counts, so I'll label this over here frequency. Okay, so when you go to make a graph, you typically don't want to have a lot of dead space, so I'm going to try to use the space I was given most purposefully. So first off, in terms of my frequencies, the highest frequency I have is 12. So on this axis over here, I've got to be able to get up to 12. So I'm going to see if maybe I can count by 1. So if I were to do that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, that'll just barely fit. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to label it. Now I think it's a good idea to actually put these tick marks right here on these lines, just to stress to people that you are using these lines for when you're doing your counting. Okay, so I have my vertical axis labeled. Now let's come over here to the horizontal axis. Now if you wanted to, you could make every one of these different colors maybe only one box wide. Okay, so I could have that be my box for brown, and then I would just come up here to the frequency for however many times brown occurred in my data set. Except if I were to do that, I only have, what, 6 colors, so I'm only going to, if I were to do that, I would probably only use about half the space I was given here. And that's fine, but I could see if maybe I could come out here and stretch this out a little bit more. So maybe I'll make for each bar, maybe I'll make it 2 boxes wide. So I'm going to come down here and kind of hash out my game plan before I start actually drawing all these, just to make sure everything can fit. So this would be my bar for brown. All right, now one thing to keep in mind with a bar graph is that the bars do not touch. So this is just a rule of thumb that the distance that's between the bars is either half the length of the bar to whatever that length of the bar is. This is just a rule of thumb, just to kind of help us estimate appropriate distance requirements. Now, when you go to make bar graphs inside programs like Excel, it already does this spacing for you. But when we build this by hand, we have to be aware of this. So if this is going to be my bar for brown, so maybe I'll go ahead and down here and label that, just to kind of show that that's what my plan. So this is going to be, so my bar for brown, I'm going to make it 2 boxes wide. Then the space I'm going to leave is either going to be the length of the bar, so 2 boxes wide, or half the length of this bar, or 1 box wide. So I'm just going to maybe leave it 1 box wide and then see if I can fit all these bars in here. So then ultimately I had 6 colors. So this would be my first color, second color, that'd be my third color, skip, fourth color, fifth color, sixth color. Cool, so it'll all fit. So now I'm going to come down here and label these. So I had brown, yellow, red, orange. And then blue, then green. Alright, so now we're going to, so now that I have a game plan for how wide my rectangles are going to be, now we're going to come up and, based upon the frequency, we'll determine how high these rectangles go. So brown had a frequency of 12, yellow 10, so brown would need to come up to here, yellow, the bark needs to come up to here, 9, 6, so 9 for red. 6 for orange, 3 for blue, and 5 for green. Okay, so we're just going to finish drawing in our rectangles. So this would be the bar for brown. Maybe I'll try to fill it in so it maybe stands out a little bit more. Here's the bar for yellow. Bar for red, orange, blue, and green. Great, so there is our finished bar graph. Now keep in mind one thing when you're doing your homework. Most often on your homework, after you make your frequency distribution, there might be a multiple choice question where they'll ask you which one of these is the correct bar graph for this frequency distribution, A, B, C, or D, and then you would just select that one. Making a bar graph from scratch is a lot more difficult. There's more things that you kind of have to be aware of. So as opposed to just selecting, yeah, B is the correct bar graph, when you make it from scratch, these are the things that I look at when I go to grade it. I look, do you have a title? Okay, and your title should be as descriptive as possible for as much as you know about your data set, so that people can look at your title and get a good idea about what the data is that's inside your bar graph. Do you have axis labels? On both the vertical and horizontal axis. Do your bars not touch? So I'm looking that you have left some space in between each of your bars. I'm also looking that you have consistent spacing. So here's a couple of things then for what that means. Each of your bars needs to be the same width across. So if you decided to make your first bar 2 boxes wide, each of these other bars need to be 2 boxes wide. I'm also looking that the gap that you have left between the bars is consistent all the way through. So if you decided I'm going to leave 1 box between the bars, that should be consistent all the way down the line. Your frequencies should start over here at 0. Okay, so this is going to be 0. And then however far you decided to label that first tick mark, so I decided to count by 1, then every tick mark after that also needs to count up by 1. Meaning you can't have on this axis Like, so for instance, this starts at 0. Let's say your first tick mark is 1, then your next tick mark cannot be at 3. Right? That's not consistent spacing. If I'm going to determine this distance to be 1 unit, then this distance right here also needs to be 1 unit. Okay, so I can't have that jump like that. So this would be inconsistent spacing. So if this distance represents 1 unit, all of these going all the way up have to represent 1 unit. So I would strongly encourage you in a couple of your homework questions to try to make a bar graph from scratch. So you can get graph paper either at any office supply store, or there's PDFs for graph paper online, or I'll have some graph paper for you on Canvas if you wanted to print off. So I'd encourage you to try to make some of these from scratch and keep in mind all of these things that I would be looking at. And if you want me to look at a completed bar graph, feel free to stop in or send me the picture, and then I can look at it and provide you some feedback about whether or not your bar graph was made correctly.